Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Olena and I live in Busan, South Korea. I'm currently an English teacher here. So if you want to learn more about Korea, if you want to see some apartment tours, some tours around Korea and just my thoughts, then you've come to the right place. But I'm also going to be doing some other different videos that focus on traveling in general and our experiences, as well as the experiences of first-generation Americans, which is what we're going to talk about today, my experience as a first-generation American. And some other topics that I'm looking forward to sharing are Peace Corps stories, reverse culture shock, travel stories in general, and my friends' experiences as first-generation Americans. So if you're interested in hearing stories about living abroad, moving, or maybe if you're considering Peace Corps, then definitely subscribe to my channel as those videos will be coming out. So before I share my story on what it was like to grow up as a first-generation American, I need to address something that's very important. At the day of this filming, Ukraine is unfortunately going through an invasion from Russia, and there's many lives that have been lost, and it's just a very devastating time for my family that are there, for just all of my Ukrainian brothers and sisters that are there. I think of you every day. I pray for you every day. My eyes are glued to the news. And I just really hope that when we watch this video in the future, that Ukraine will be in a much better place than it is now. And I thank every one of you who has donated to help my family survive during these crazy times and volatile times when it comes to the currency, when it comes to prices of things, just so they can survive this crazy wave of uncertainty and fear and lack of safety. So as I said, I just really hope that if you're watching this video like way in the future, I'm hoping that Ukraine is in a better place. So as you've seen in the title, I will be talking about my experience as a first-generation American growing up in the United States. Now, I think it really makes a big difference as to what age you move to America. So what is a first-generation American? A first-generation American is somebody who is not born in the States, and then they move, of course, to start their life over in the US. So you can be born somewhere and move to the US when you're 1 year old, or you could be 17 years old, or you could be 30 years old. You're all counted as first-generation Americans. So as you can see, like, your experiences can be completely different from each other. And even as a 9-year-old, my experience is going to be much different than somebody who moved at 5 years old, or than somebody who moved who's just 4 years older than me, especially when it comes to language and accent and things like that. So there are 10 main questions that I asked myself and that I'm going to ask all of my friends who have shared their stories. Instead of just blabbing on and probably going off topic, I have written all of my answers down just so I can give the best possible representation of how I feel about something, and just so I don't waste your time as well. It's a difficult question to answer, and it kind of depends on whether I'm in the US and being asked this question, or whether I'm in Korea and being asked this question. At the age that I moved, it's quite a tender age. It's always like being on a balance and always teetering between the two identities. When I answer, simply it depends on how lazy I'm feeling that day. Since I live abroad, I have to answer this question a lot because I'm an expat. Even in the US, it's been difficult to come up with a go-to answer. The easy answer is that I'm from the US, but that is not 100% accurate for me. I feel compelled to say that I'm originally from Ukraine, but the reason why I don't have an accent is that I immigrated at the age of 9. People automatically assume that I wasn't born in Ukraine. They always ask me, "Oh, where's that name from?" Or, "Oh, where are your parents from?" Or, "Where are your ancestors from?" No one ever asks me, where are you from? I especially have to address this question in the US because of my name, because it's different. The culture that I feel most like I belong to is the US culture, because of how I was brought up when we moved there. I came from a large Ukrainian but Russian-speaking city into a tiny rural town. I remember even at 9 years old being shocked at where we moved. It was exciting to see Atlanta, but the buildings quickly faded away. The biggest difficulty was that there were no Russian-speaking kids around. So I literally left my life behind and never looked back. The past quite literally felt like a dream. And now I'm not even kidding, guys. It literally felt unreal to me. Like, I even remember as a teenager thinking about when I used to live in Ukraine. It just didn't feel real at all. And then when I went back to visit when I was 16, it was so different. It's changed a lot. And some of the places that I do remember were much smaller than I remember them being. And it felt like I had not really lived there. It felt like it was a dream. Like I had just lived a dream there. Nothing from Ukraine was brought to the US. Tradition, food, culture, pop culture, and even language. My mother always spoke Russian, and we did have Russian language channels for a while. But as soon as I hit puberty, I wanted nothing more than to fit in. So I didn't want to speak Russian. I stopped, and I regretted this when I started college. And in college is when I started taking Russian lessons, and I ended up getting a major in it. I think what makes my experience so different than other post-USSR kids is that it wasn't my whole family that moved, it was just me and my mom that moved. So when we moved, we had to assimilate to my stepfather's culture. He didn't like Russian food, so we never ate Russian food, you know? And because we were in a rural area, there wasn't Russian-speaking people that we could communicate with. So I was never surrounded really by the culture much at all. It was literally left behind. One is more optimistic, one is more pessimistic. In my experience, Ukrainians are more direct and not as smiley and sweet about it. So when I visit, it's a little bit of a culture shock. You don't see people walking in the street, smiling for no reason, or greeting you as they pass you by. I understand that I grew up in the South, whose culture is different from that of the North and other parts of the US. Also, the food is different. Many Americans are disgusted by some of the food that we love so dearly. So that part of myself, I have had to hide from my American friends. Food like холодец, shuba, smoked fish, caviar, salted fish. I do not feel 100% accepted by either culture. I think this is also where age plays a big part, as I mentioned. The age that you move to the US makes a huge difference as to how much you are accepted into either culture. The younger you are, the more American you feel. The older you are, the more you identify with the original culture. I moved to the US to be old enough to be identified as Ukrainian or different from others, but too young to be seen as someone who understands the struggles of Ukrainians. I have never felt like I belonged to either culture. Of course, when you're young, you aren't aware of these nuances, but I always felt like I was a little different than everyone. I didn't fully get jokes and sarcasm, certain types of American humor. I didn't relate to the references to pop culture, and I didn't fit into a culture that idolized being extroverted. In Ukraine, people are more reserved, and I feel like I would have been more comfortable there when it comes to personality and social situations. When I went back to Ukraine in 2007, right before I turned 16, I was told by a family member that I wasn't Ukrainian. That was extremely hurtful. And it was a very close family member. And I don't remember what I was saying, but maybe that I was proud that I was Ukrainian or something like that. And she just looked dead at me in the eyes and she's like, "You're not Ukrainian." And it's basically denying my identity. Like, that is so hurtful. Just imagine, you're born in your original country, are partially raised there, then immigrate for a better life. Then when you return to visit, you're flat out told you don't belong here, you're not one of us. When comparing both, I feel like I am more accepted by Americans than Ukrainians. Generally, I feel like Americans embrace people from different backgrounds more. My teenage years, when it comes to identity, were very difficult. At first, I began to deny my identity and stopped speaking Russian because it honestly felt so far away from me and like a dream from a past life. 7 years of no visits makes a big difference when you're young. I left when I was 9. I didn't come back to visit until I was 16. When we first arrived, it felt like a long-lost dream. I just overall felt disconnected from Odessa. That 2007 summer when I went to Ukraine is when my curiosity of my roots and ancestry started. My mother was adopted and it was a closed adoption, so I couldn't get any information there. My biological father had left my mom when she was pregnant with me, and I had never met the man. I was at the age when questions started to arise. Who is this man? What does he look like? Do we have some similar features? What is my family history? Is there anything interesting about my family? So I asked my mom if we could pay him a visit. People in Ukraine don't frequently move, so they most likely were at the same exact place that they had been years ago. When we went there, my grandmother was of course very surprised but hospitable, although she did say some kind of rude and inappropriate things. I won't go over the details, but the whole visit was very disappointing, meeting my father and meeting my grandmother. My grandmother said that everyone in the family had been blue-collar workers. My grandfather's side is from Leningrad, and one aunt moved to Poland. These are the most exciting things about my family. She plainly said, "There are no notable people in your family." She showed lots of photos that I didn't get to take pictures of. So after that trip, the search for my identity has honestly still been ongoing. When it comes to considering a place as a home, since I've lived in various places, I would say that Winder is the closest thing to a home. My stepfather's family is there, my mom is near there, my friends are there, so it's gonna be a home to me. But whenever I go back, I feel like a total stranger because I've been living abroad for 6 years now. I feel very out of place. I have grown and changed a lot. I experience total culture shock every time I visit. I do feel connected to people who have the same background as me. Absolutely. I feel connected to anyone who has immigrated to the US. We just see the world in a different way. Even if we come from different original cultures, there is still an understanding between us. I also feel more connected to Americans who have lived abroad. I know that when I return, I will need to find a group of people that have lived outside of the US or American expats that have lived outside of the US as well. I realized I was different when I showed my friends Russian food. That was a big moment. because the friends would react with disgust and like the food is not normal, even though it was normal and delicious to me. And I realized I was different when I was always being called the Russian girl, not the Ukrainian girl. I liked it because it made me stand out and be different. Looking back though, I'm disappointed in the teachers because none of them corrected the kids and none of them told them that, hey, she's not Russian, she's Ukrainian. I've also been told I was weird a few times. Not exactly sure what that means. I questioned my identity a lot in my 20s. Heck yes. In Peace Corps, I had lots of time to read. And I love reading self-development books. So I spent a lot of time thinking about my identity, my childhood, my past, my ancestry. Who am I? Where do I come from? Who are my descendants, you know? And I think I will always question that just because of my unique situation, I guess you can say, you know, with my mom being adopted and with me leaving Ukraine and not having a relationship with my father's side of the family. So like, I don't really have a connection to either side of the family, so I will always question my identity. Of course, as I said, I still question my identity, but I think what would help me the most is if I connected with other Ukrainians or Russians who had immigrated to the US at around the same age that I was, just because we have a very unique experience and the time that we moved and the age that we moved at, we would just have a better understanding. And I haven't met many Russians or Ukrainians who struggle with the language like I do. So I think for me, if I met more first generationers who struggle with keeping up their Russian, they would just understand more where I'm coming from, but I haven't met many of those like at all. Almost all of them are still great with their Russian, and I'm honestly like super jealous. So with me struggling with Russian, that is what I've been struggling with the most. It's what I feel separates me the most from Ukraine and what separates me the most from speaking to my family in Ukraine and the Ukrainian culture. And then when I visit Odessa, I definitely feel a separation there because I struggle so much with the language. So if I had a great language, if I would have kept it up when I was a teenager, if I would have forced myself to make some friends, maybe online or something, who spoke Russian, I think that would have made a huge difference on my language. Not as a teenager, but literally from the moment that I moved to the US, if I would have just had friends that I could speak Russian with, I think I would be in a little bit of a different situation. I would at least feel more connected to my culture, linguistically speaking. So that is it for my questions. I hope you found it interesting and maybe you learned something new. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe. Please leave a comment, let me know what you found interesting, and other than that, I will see you in the next one. Bye!